So welcome everyone to Media Arts Futures Past. This is the Starship Titanic 25th Whooshiversary webinar, an event hosted by the Department of Cinema and Media Arts in the School of the Arts, Media, Performance and Design at York University. My name is Alison Humphrey. I'm a PhD candidate in Cinema and Media Studies, and I'm also teaching a course in Writing for Games and Interactive Media, which is hosting this panel of esteemed guests. In the mid-90s, after doing a master's in interactive multimedia at the Royal College of Art in London, England, I started working at a little startup called The Digital Village, which was developing its first product, a groundbreaking CD-ROM adventure game by Douglas Adams called Starship Titanic. Full disclosure, I got the job the old-fashioned way, through nepotism. My uncle Robbie was chief executive of the company. Which is a perfect segue into introducing our panel, because he's here with us today, along with several more lovely and talented members of the dev team of Starship Titanic, who have taken time out of their busy schedules to join us. So I'm going to invite them to introduce themselves, stating their role on the game then, and what they do now, and kind of seeing if there are any links between those two moments in time. So shall we start with you, Robbie? And I'll ask you to unmute.
Hi, I'm Robbie, Alison's uncle. I was the chief executive chairman and co-founder of the Digital Village. So what was my role on Starship Titanic? Well, briefly, it was getting the funding, putting the team together. It was very, very wisely promoting the next person will talk, Emma, to be the producer, who sort of took the game by the scruff of the neck. When I set out to do it, when I look back now, I had not a clue what I was letting myself in for. Not a clue. I'd come from a TV production background and I just had not a clue. And it remains one of the most exciting working experiences of my entire life, working with this astonishing team and getting something which lasts in cult status over the and I'll talk more in a way. Sometimes I think my role in the end was bringing in food parcels over the weekend. The team who were working all the time, that was why I could show support with then young children. We'd go to Tesco's and I think they couldn't believe how much crap I was allowing them to buy, because we were bringing all in, all the goodies and the cake and things and box sets of Friends videos and just anything I could think, just to show solidarity on a Sunday for the team who were working unbelievably hard. We attempted so many things which were groundbreaking back then. Now, what do? I do a number of things. What's maybe relevant for here, I do a lot of work on artificial intelligence, particularly the governance and ethics around AI. I'm actually, in fact, about to start developing a product which uses conversational AI. And I have a little history podcast business, which is about to launch with Stephen Fry and Joanna Lumley and a fabulous, diverse crew of writers and young actors and performers from different backgrounds. So my interest in storytelling stays. So I do a variety of things, but I suppose the direct link with the game is thinking still about all of the philosophy and ideas that we shared with Douglas, which informs a lot of the thinking I do around AI. So that's me briefly.
So we'll go to Emma now.
Thank you. My name's Emma Westecott. I was employed at the Digital Village to work as author on Starship Titanic, which really perplexed me because I wasn't an author and I was working on a game written by an author, and to be called an author just seemed really confusing. What it actually meant, when I went into the team, what it actually meant was working with the game design team to deal with creating a variant of the story world, which started off as a script, into a playable game. And so I think one of the things that's quite interesting in a company like the Digital Village, in which most people came from outside of games, was this use of sort of techniques and tools from other media as sort of core bibles for the development of the narrative and the story. So yeah, I started as author and I ended up as producer, which meant I had, for the last 6 months of production, I had the pleasure of making people tea 24 hours a day to help the remarkable development team sort of finish the game. And really, I think the connections to what I started with Starship Titanic and what I do now. Now I'm an associate professor of game design at OCAD University in Toronto, which is an art and design university. I'm really interested in thinking about how game making can be used to as a sort of experimental and expressive form. I think we've seen in recent years with phenomena like personal games, the game makers are increasingly looking at the form as a way of telling their stories in a range of ways. And one of the things that's my great privilege at the moment is to work with students who are building experimental and personal narratives through game engines and game classes at my university.
Brilliant. Thank you and welcome. And let's go to Neil next.
Hi, thanks, Alison. Gosh, Amber, that sounds fantastic. I should say a lot of us haven't really kept up, and this is the first time we've talked for 20 years maybe about this game. So there'll be some catching up, I expect, going on. So so I was hired as a writer to kind of work alongside Douglas, who's notorious for missing deadlines and not delivering. And I think my perceived skill as a writer, script editor at the time, coming from TV and film, was that I talked the same language as Douglas and maybe help him edge something and get some deliveries done. So I think that was a 2-week hire, Robbie. I can't remember, but anyway, I was still there 2 years later, still trying to get material out of Douglas. So I worked in TV and film. I'd never worked in interactive before. The 2 years I worked on this game is such a lesson in, when you're young, taking opportunities, because it utterly changed my life and the direction that my writing took. And since then, I've worked on 30 or 40 games. For some years, I just lived interactive, and I was everywhere, and all my career was interactive and games. And I'm still a writer, and I'm still incredibly busy, and I'm still writing games. So this 1-2 week job that was just a bit of cash, maybe, turned into something that utterly changed my life. And I think that's kind of such a lesson in anybody in media. Just seize it when it comes along.
What a wonderful story. Thank you. And let's go to Jason now.
Hi guys. Yeah, so I'm a computer programmer, and I got dragged in to work on the Starship Titanic. And I think most of the work I did was actually rolling around on the floor laughing at the script from Neil, Mike, and Douglas. It was absolutely brilliant, though after a while we got to the point where nothing they said was funny anymore, because we'd had so much of it that we just got saturated. So it took me a few years before I could look back at some of the lines and actually realize they were funny again. But it was a great time. And after Starship Titanic, I moved on to Raumschiff Titanic, which was the German version. So that was quite interesting, trying to get Neil's jokes to work in German. So that was quite a challenge for us. And then after that, I moved on to other games companies, and I've ended up in the big world of Formula One. So I've moved off into a different form of entertainment now.
Brilliant. And what I love about this is that we've got, sort of 4 quadrants of the game development experience here, and different perspectives on what was a very, very common and intense experience for everybody involved. So I want to start with, for the first question, sort of setting the scene that the game was originally scheduled for release in 1997, a quarter century ago, but it was delayed and finally launched in April 1998. In honor of Douglas Adams's famous quote, "I love deadlines. I love the whooshing noise they make as they go by." It seemed fitting that we actually mark the 25th Whooshiversary of that original deadline. So I'm now going to read another quote by Douglas, this one from the intro to the Starship Titanic strategy guide, which was bundled with the game. Here it is, written by Neil Richards. And He said in the introduction, he says, we are about 2 days from final delivery of the game. A lot of people have been saying to me with worried, searching looks, how come the CD-ROM is 6 months late? The answer is very simple. It's because it's a bloody CD-ROM. That's why. All CD-ROMs are 6 months late, at least. It's an immutable law of the universe. The only surprising thing about ours being late is that we were surprised by it. We had no idea, well, certainly I had no idea, of the scale of the enterprise we were undertaking. Was that everyone else's experience when you started working on the game? I know, Robbie, you've actually kind of touched on that already.
Well, should I take the first? I mean, it was the first project that we were doing at the company, the Digital Village. And I mean, when I look back on it, as I say, I think it's probably as well that I didn't know how much I didn't know, because I don't think we'd have been as bold. I don't think we would have tried as many things. Now, my memory, and I may well be corrected by others on the team, just because it's distant now, is that it was one of those things where both the actual development software we needed to write ourselves. There were 3D engines that were being written for rendering ourselves. We were sort of making a few silicon graphics machines kind of go far beyond their capacity. We were going to create a natural language parsing engine for the game. So I think we were climbing a number of challenges, and I think in a way, considering all that, it was remarkable how unlate we were. I mean, obviously, a lot of my job was to try and make sure we got additional funds, to try as much as possible and keep an increasingly anxious co-publisher off the team's backs, which I don't really think I desperately succeeded on. I remember a call which nobody else would have been on, but I was on a call with my opposite number, the co-publisher, and the game was running late and we needed more budget. And he was getting cross. He was a tough New Yorker. And I, being a Brit, my voice was getting softer and gentler and quieter, and he was getting more and more anxious. And I worked out that actually me going quiet, it demonstrated that I didn't get what was going on. I didn't get how serious this was. He would have been much happier if he'd heard me sort of, barking out orders and firing people as I was on the phone. And I had to say to him, no, me being quiet, Gilles, I really get this. I get how difficult this is. I understand it. So a lot of my role was to try and keep things. And then I'll just say one other thing. I remember gathering Emma and a wonderful man called Tim Browse, who sadly died a number of years ago, who was one of the absolutely core members of the team, and kind of saying plaintively, what can we cut? Is there a level we can cut? And they went, no, Robbie, it's not designed that way. Douglas has designed a game where every single thing is there is not a level you can cut. No. Okay, fair enough. I might have been on top of that issue a little earlier, but there we go. I've learned. So I think that was why it was just such an exciting project. So from my perspective, it was, just do in the end what I could to support the team, to look after Douglas, to look after publishers, to look after anxious investors, but most importantly, the team, because it was just an amazing team, and anything I could do. And I still, all these years later, I'm not sure I've worked with a more exciting group of people. In fact, I don't think I have. I think it's the most exciting group of people I ever worked with in my career.
Amen. Who else would like to talk on what it felt like to join that project?
Well, I just wanted to thank Robbie for creating that setting or context. I share your opinion that, I've been lucky to work with really solid teams 2 or 3 times in my career, but the first and the most significant was definitely my experience of the Digital Village, and it was entirely down to the amount of care you put into the conditions within which we worked, right? So it's a significant achievement. And, just to place that sort of firmly at your door.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's very kind. Much appreciated.
It's true as well. And I mean, to answer Alison's question about did any of us have an idea of what we were doing? Sorry, there's a delay. I don't know if it's me. I just wanted to answer your question, Alison. I don't think any of us had a clue of what we were doing. I was employed quite early on, and I think that not only was it a new company with people from different industries with the first game they were making, it was also in a time when very few people had made games like this. I mean, I remember being so anxious about Myst 2 coming out because I thought that they were going to have moving video as a way of moving between the game, and I rushed to the store and bought it and took it back and ripped it apart, and they were just using point clicks. They weren't using the video that we had spent so long developing techniques to deliver, and it was really exciting looking at new work that was being released. But no, I don't think any of us had a clue.
Neil or Jason?
That idea, Robbie, that there was a point where we just couldn't cut the game. I learned the biggest lesson ever in that, and so in all the games I'd ever worked on since then, I've always kept my eye on the sort of bubbles that I knew from a narrative point of view that I could just snip off. I never told anybody. And it's kind of always worth knowing if you're working in interactive media, just have your own little secret area where you sort of think, do you know, I think we could probably lose this or drop this, because it's almost inevitable for everybody when you're building a game that you're going to have to sacrifice some stuff before you reach the end, whether you're an artist, whether you're in design, narrative, whatever. So you want to keep your own little, it's kind of like defensive design. It's a sort of some stuff that you'll forego, and obviously you have to fight very hard to let it go, but you know quietly you can make the thing work without it. So because it's probably worth, as we look back to this ancient game, trying to pull out from our experiences, the sort of things that have become our little our sort of lanterns that guide us through our creative lives. And such a lot. I just want to add one more thing about the people element that Emma said and that Robbie so displayed. Absolutely, for me it's still such a sort of warm cradle, the way I think back to that environment of building a game. So many games that I've worked on that haven't had that atmosphere, that caring environment, and so I've always hoped that I can emulate that and try and bring it to the team relationships and the games that I've moved on to. So I suppose another lesson for me, work is your life. Work is being a human, and displaying all the better side of yourself is kind of important in your working environment when you all create together in a team. The end.
Yeah, I'd say from my point of view, it was quite an interesting thing to jump into. So as you were saying before, Robbie, Tim Browse had started the work on the game engine and realized that he needed more programmers to come along. And so he invited some of us to join him in that endeavor. So I jumped in with the game partially done. And one of the things you find with computer programming is just about everything you start doing, you say, I don't know how to do this. It looks impossible. It's just, how could I possibly deliver this thing? So it's really quite stressful to start with because you just don't know where you're going to start. And somehow you get to the end and you've done it and achieved it. And Starship Titanic was a massive one of those where we jumped into this natural language engine, had no idea where we were going to start. Douglas and Robbie had promised the world that we were going to have amazing characters that you could talk to, and we had to make that come true to some extent. A little bit of success, maybe it could have been better, but I think for the technology of the time, it worked out really well. But it was an interesting time getting through those challenges. And what was really good was having a team of people around you who you knew could deliver. You could trust them. If anyone was asked to do something, it would somehow get done, even though it was impossible. And I think that was a thread through the whole team, which really helped us to deliver something really great at the end.
Fabulous. Robbie, please.
Yeah, and maybe jumping ahead, Ali, to something you've already got in line, but I'd be really interested in asking Emma and Neil and Jason a question that has gone round in my head about the game and gameplay, which was one of the reasons possibly it was not at the time the hit that we all hoped, although it's gone on to have cult status, is I wondered about whether it owed too much at the very beginning to those old Infocom parser games, and it was just too difficult at the beginning, and that the reward structure at the game just wasn't, and a number of people kind of bailed out too quickly and just felt that I've been wondering for years and wanting to ask the team what they thought about that, particularly people who've gone on to be experts in a way that I'm not, that early, so there's one issue about levels, but that early reward structure in the game, which actually gave people a sense of progress. So I think people have got through it, but I wonder whether we made the game too difficult to start in the early gameplay. It was just too hard. Genuine question, not a leading one, but a genuine question.
I think one of the problems that we faced with the dialogue engine was that it was something that had never really been done before, and when people went to talk to robots in a computer game, they weren't expecting to be able to talk to them like other people, and so the way they talked to the robots was as a person trying to talk to a computer, knowing that the computer wouldn't understand them. So I think they had trouble actually having conversation with the robots, and it was a real challenge to get people to actually try and talk to them a bit more naturally. And there was an interesting point where at one point I put a clever sort of bug into the robot's programming so that it misunderstood what you said and gave you a very funny response. And the testers actually came back with that and said, there's a bug here. When I say this, the robot gives me the wrong answer. So it was actually very hard to convince them that it could be more human and it could make mistakes. So even though I was deliberately doing that, it was seen as a fault in the program rather than a funny joke.
I think the game is notoriously hard. I don't think it's just at the beginning thing. I think that the puzzles were very sort of particular and specific. But one of the things I find really interesting when my students find it and play it is that many sort of contemporary game players burn through the puzzles quite quickly. So I think the other challenge we had was also one of positioning, which was, we were interested in going into bookstores and getting to people who didn't really identify as game players in any way. And so I think that the type of market that loved the game did have a great experience with that difficulty. And there are many games that are sold these days and they're meant to be hard and tough. But I think with our expectations, with the time of release and the framing of the market we were going for, it was hard to have a game of the toughness of Starship Titanic.
Yeah, maybe I can just add to that as well now. I guess having worked on a lot of adventure games since Starship Titanic, we're a lot more careful, I think, in all the games I work on to ease people in, and also maybe I'm always one asking for logic, logic, please, to every puzzle all the way through, a logic that belongs to the world, and I guess on Starship Titanic we there was a kind of crazed illogic that was also logical, that was part of that world, and who knows, maybe if we remade it now, we'd sell 100 million. I don't know, but it wouldn't be half as much weird fun.
And I'm very delighted to introduce the fifth member of the panel, Yoz Grahame. Welcome.
Hey,
Hello.
Yoz.
Sorry I'm so late. Hello, everyone.
Oh.
Nice to see. Wow. People I haven't seen in a long time. Thank you so much for having me. My name's Yoz Grahame. I am currently based in Oakland, California. And I was the Digital Village's first dedicated web person, I believe. We had, up until that point, a lot of people, we had lots of web stuff, but lots of, people doing bits of web stuff in between other things. And so I worked on various websites, and especially the various versions of the Starship Titanic website with Alison. I think when I say, wait, actually, sorry, I should be clear. When I say first dedicated web person, I mean first dedicated web engineer. software person, as opposed to Alison was producer first, I think, a web producer first.
But given that it was my first ever experience as a web producer, and the web had kind of only just been invented several years before, I think you were indeed the first real web person. I learned tons from you. I remember you teaching me HTML. It was an incredible opportunity to work with you as well as with the rest of the team.
Likewise.
So we're just actually been talking about what it was like to kind of jump into a game that was incredibly ambitious for its time. So what was it like for you to come on board that project?
It was amazing. It was, so obviously I had, like many people, I was a huge fan of Douglas's. I'd grown up with Hitchhikers, and I had just finished my computer science degree at University College London, when I was wondering about things to do. I'd been working for a couple of years for an ISP, and then working on web stuff. ISP being internet service provider, and excuse me, and looking around for things to do. And then I saw Douglas on some Sunday morning TV show interview, and I thought, and he mentioned the Digital Village, and I thought, oh, that would be an interesting thing to do. And so I happened to mention it to somebody who I was at university with, and he said, oh, Digital Village, I've been setting up their networking, I'll introduce you. Guy called Andreas Antonopoulos, who is now like one of the world's Bitcoin authorities, apparently. So it was, and by that time, so this was early '97. So the game was already well underway. You know, I came in, and there were, it was amazing seeing all the work going on, getting to meet the team. Getting to meet also that realizing or joined that someone who I'd already known from my past with internet service providers was working on it, the late great Debbie Barham, who was one of the writers, and you know, she recognized me as I was going through the office and said hello, and it was and so we got to. The great thing about the web stuff that Alison, I'm sure you know, when we worked on together with the web stuff, was being able to put our own stamp on it, tell a lot of the story of Starship Titanic, working with Neil and Michael on a lot of the text and ideas. And one of the great things about it was that in those days, anything we put out with Douglas's name on it just got jumped on by fans, right? It got absolutely flooded. And so we were able to do things like the employee forums and things, which were kind of buried secrets, you know, in the basement with a sign on the door saying beware of the leopard, and people would discover it anyway. And it was wonderful to do those things and be silly. We could, it was great to have a project which we could be joyously silly on. I remember part of it, there was something we wanted the employee forum to have Blorontin calendar dates on it, and Blorontin being the planet that the Starship Titanic was built on. And so we said, okay, how does the Blorontin calendar work? And then Michael said, right, and just wrote out the most ridiculous plan he could think of and said, right, program that, you bastard. And I said, right. And I wrote 4 lines of Perl to do it. And like, to this day, if I look at that code again, I cannot decipher how it works. It just does. And so it was just like opportunities to be creative and silly. Like the form for, you know, signups in advance, you know, we asked people to put their name, email address, and favorite species of frog. And we had this giant list of frogs that you could choose as your favorite species of frog. And so, sorry, I'm coming late, and I've completely missed what has been discussed so far. So I don't know how much of this and everything has been discussed, and I don't want to, you know.
None of that was touched on, so that's perfect.
Okay. I don't want to especially given that the web properties were just kind of this small offshoot of the much bigger game project, which had much more work going in and much more creativity going into it. I think it's worth at some point, talking about the employee forum and everything around that. But I want to. You're in charge, Alison. You're in charge. How do you want this? Do we? I'll let you lead.
Quite all right. No. It's a good point. So Emma's got her hand up, so I'll defer to her. But that is very definitely on my list because, of course, that was the web side of things. Was this whole other kind of mutant baby game going on to the side of the main CD-ROM? So Emma.
Yeah, what I wanted to talk about a little bit was the sort of nested story worlds that were going on. So first of all, as a team, we were invited to play within Douglas's imaginative universe, which was huge. I mean, so Starship Titanic was mentioned in the book series as a sort of throwaway reference, which is Douglas felt very clearly that a game had to be about a place. So, the original sort of conception behind the spaceship was that reference into his larger universe, right? And so the responsibility of making experiences within that universe was something that I think everybody took quite seriously, whether it be the game itself or whether it be the website. And I still realize now, I mean, in the meantime, you can look at Jenkins talking about convergence culture or the field of transmedia where stories are being told across different forms, and see that really what went on at the Digital Village with that game wasn't just game development. It was a sort of convergent media practice which existed on the web, in forums, in flat websites, in all of the wonderful work that you did, Alison, in creating the sort of paratext around the game itself. And then within the game, you have these multiple layers of storytelling crafted by excellent writers. I mean, at the time, I remember, Neil, there was no such thing as a game writer. It just wasn't a role. And yet now you look at sort of the amount of narrative designers big companies sort of take on board to help with the sort of fictive frame and narrative approach of games. It's a huge industry. It wasn't one then. I think you've got a story about how long it took you to get a writing credit on a game, which maybe you can share with us. But so within that, you've got the crafting of the story world, you've got the sort of framing of the sort of dialogue, you've got the transposition of that into sort of text, all based around this premise of a discussion between the player and the robot. And we had, amazing storytellers who were able to say, well, look, if we say the robots are dysfunctional because the ship has fallen apart, we can get behind the fact that the dialogue isn't perfect. So the whole way through the design and development process, whether it be story-led or gameplay-led, there was this sort of like checking in on different aspects of storytelling. So it's not purely the parser, although that is brilliant. It's not purely the quality of the writing in the robots, although that's world-class and excellent. It's the way that the combined apparatus works together to further the story universe. And because it's a classroom, I just wanted to point out that was, looking back, that's what was created, even if we didn't know at the time that was what was being done. And the motivation for that was to fit to the Douglas's tradition and what we felt as our responsibility to play within that. Anyway, I just wanted to say that.
That's brilliant. Yeah. Neil, go.
Yeah, no, Emma, that's so true. I mean, we were, we were kind of creating transmedia without even knowing we were doing it. In fact, I think everybody in the office, coders, artists, everybody, they were all narrative designers and writers. I think a lot of people probably sort of became writers, or felt they maybe understood how writing worked as a result of that 2-year experience. And the great thing was, it was all kind of shared, and there was always a place where when people went off to shoveled shoveled up more writing, more stuff, more content. There was always a place for it to go, and we kept expanding the world. So, we expanded the world into the in-flight magazine that went in the box, I seem to remember, or the strategy guide, and then the web, and then it just went in every direction. I think that I've seen interviews, maybe with you, Robbie, talking about, big online worlds that we could have created. Well, that really would have been the next stage, I think, to kind of create a Titanic world and the Blaurantin world, where further great installments and narratives could have taken place.
I read an interview with Michael Bywater, who was another one of the writing team, the core writing team, who actually was talking about Blaurantin and wishing that he felt that was kind of the most fun part for him, and the most successful was the world that you and he and Douglas kind of built out, the sort of backstory, the parts that are sort of off screen that in a way you don't really know about, aside from the little hints that you get through the game. That he always wished that he could kind of keep building the Starship Titanic universe that way.
Well, I don't know. Just, I think as a co-host, I'll be able to share my screen. Let's share my screen quickly in terms of worlds that got created. I'd be interested, Ali, I guess your students have sort of seen some of the game or played some of the game. So if I could just share my screen just very quickly, this has always struck me in terms of worlds that we created as interesting. The design for the movie Passengers, which was that movie about a doomed ship, and I was just always struck by looking at the Art Deco-ness of the bar that got created and the Michael Sheen character. My machine's been very slow here, but if anybody just goes and has a look at the artwork for Passengers, there we go, and goes and have a look at our bartender and the way that our bartender worked in the movie. This was an Art Deco designed ship, or a part in the ship. It's other people, I think somebody from that production design on that very big movie had definitely seen or played Starship Titanic, because it's definitely just go and have a bit of a Google about the bartender in his red jacket. Look at our bartender. And of course, if we're doing shout outs, I'd love maybe any of you to talk about the amazing artists we had on the team as well. Isabel Molina and Oscar, sorry, my because that was another whole major part of the game. The insistence on this astonishing quality of the art, this architectural art design, that was yet another enormously high bar that we were looking to jump in terms of that. And I think Emma, you were very involved in a lot of that work, and then trying to make sure that we could take and render and be with those amazing designs that were coming out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's another example of the craft exhibited in all the different areas and the storytelling. So I still remember Terry Jones coming into the studio because he voiced the parrots, and we wanted to use him as art reference for the animation of the parrot in the game. So he sat in the office one afternoon sort of pretending to be a parrot and moving that way and making expressions so that our artists could video it, film it, and actually use it in their animation of the character in game. So I think when it comes to art, there are all sorts of learning processes in that. Like, I remember this amazing ship, and really there were only 2-3 places you could see the amazingness. I also remember wondering about the hyper shiny surfaces where you couldn't see your own reflection in them. So there were some interesting challenges between the quality of the art that was delivered in sort of traditional painting style as reference, and then delivered by our amazing 3D art team, who went on to demo their 3D skills for software houses for many years afterwards. And so there was a sort of gap in how that then became instrumentalized in the experience. So the puzzles were spread all the way over the ship, and as were the sort of robots. So you were driven throughout this sort of huge physical experience through distributed puzzles, and that's helped us take advantage of really what at the time was a uniquely looking game. It was still at the time, it seems a preposterous thing now, where we had to make a decision between real-time 3D and pre-rendered 3D. And at the time, pre-rendered was what was chosen because that gave us the better quality, but it did limit us to the types of game design decisions we made through the environment. So I think that the ship itself provided a really interesting and rich environment for the players to sort of explore the story world from start to finish, from, you know, through the process. I mean, the premise of the game, for those of you who haven't looked at it in depth yet, was reassembling Titania. So in order to be able to fix the ship and end the game, you had to reassemble her. And so all the puzzles helped you take you to that particular direction and outcome. I've rambled off a little bit, I think, there, but it really was a spectacularly looking game for the time. And I think that we were all very proud of the way the game looked, as well as the way the game worked.
There's one of my favorite memories working on it, because there weren't many games like Starship Titanic around at the time. The most direct comparison was the Myst series. And we were in the middle of working on Starship Titanic when Riven came out, which was the sequel to Myst and probably our most direct competitor. And one of the bits of technology we had that we were really proud of was these little animation transitions that happened in movements we called navs, right? Which were, you know, every time you moved from view to view, there'd be this little animated whoosh that we rendered. And when we brought, and then I think, Emma, it was you or somebody who brought in Riven, and we all sat down to watch it, and we booted up, and we saw the first beautifully rendered screen, and somebody clicked, and it just flipped straight to the next image without any kind of animation. Suddenly, you know, this giant roar of victory went up around the room because we had something they didn't, and ours looked better in that way. And there was the thing, part of about this that fascinated me is that we were so much pushing against the limits of technology. And we, you know, these days, I suppose most productions still are in many ways, but there were also, you know, there were things that we tried to do and couldn't. And we spent a lot of time, I remember the engineering team, just spent a lot of time trying to work out how to throw the amounts of video around in, you know, short time using either, you know, QuickTime or Indio or whatever the codec was that we ended up with. But to me, the parser is a great example of something that you see in technology, these tipping points where people give up on a particular idea because you know, technology isn't powerful enough, the software isn't good enough yet, and then suddenly realizes, hang on, this can work now. And so they try it and it actually is good enough and everybody goes for it. And the parser to me was part of that, in that the parser was, most people didn't realize it was now possible to do something that was good enough. And I think a big part of that, a huge part of that, was Jason's work with especially just putting a huge amount of labor into it, just loads of testing and tracking what people were typing and wiring them up to responses. And so, yes, I think, Jason, if you want to talk about Alison, if that's all right.
Absolutely. I would actually love for Jason to kind of explain to us what the parser was and what the sort of iterative process was of developing it with the writers.
Yeah, so it was an interesting thing to work on. So we had a natural language parsing engine that was written by a woman who'd done a lot of natural language sort of work in her PhD. And that was quite a powerful engine, but it had been trained with newspaper text from the New York Times. So it was very capable at parsing language, but it wasn't very good at conversational language. So we had to kind of bolster it up with the sorts of things that people would actually ask the robots. So there were lots of different threads to that. So partially understanding what they were saying and being able to try and respond. We had 14.5 hours of recorded content to pick through for our responses, and there was never enough. So whenever somebody asked you something, there was always something we didn't actually have an answer for. So that was challenging to find the right sort of response from that stock. And then also having the robots have some knowledge so they could respond to the sorts of things people would ask about. So we put a lot of effort into things like understanding movie references or television references, so that if people talked about something they were interested in, the robot could respond in a way that made it at least come across as understanding what they were talking about. So there was an enormous amount of effort, not just in the programming team, but with the writers as well, to try and add that their content throughout the engine, so that there was more understanding of what you were talking about and being able to process that and come back with a good response. And we spent a lot of time as well going back to Douglas and saying, we need more hello, yes, no kind of answers, because all of these bits of script you've written go on for 5 minutes and they're very funny, but they don't actually allow us to have a conversation. So it was finding that balance really of the content, so that we could actually give a good conversational result, or at least try to. And you kind of look back at it now and think it was very primitive, but at the same time it was very advanced for its day. And I think the expectations were very high, and we delivered quite an amazing thing for the time. And now you see AI is getting to that point where this sort of thing actually is starting to become possible. And I think when we did it, it was pretty much impossible. And and now it is getting to that point where it could be done. But to be able to have the quality of the artwork and the script writing and all of the other things that were in the game, we also went for the same level on the audio. So rather than having the computer generated voices of the time, we had recorded audio from voice actors and actresses. That really did lend a quality to that part of the game as well that just you did not get in games. 14.5 hours of content on the CDs was just an amazing amount of content. You look at most games that would come on a floppy disk, and we had 3 CDs, even before DVDs, 3 CDs full of all of this content. So there was an enormous amount to manage there.
Go ahead, Neil. Yeah.
Yeah, Jason, because we've not talked since probably we were both in that office together. So I'm still in awe of the job that you did on that. And I think you've talked about it before, but I remember a moment when we were just testing and going through talking to a bot. And I think we went down like about 10 layers. So if you can imagine, it's a conversation level that we've had 10 responses and hearing stuff that I was really confident. I don't think we put that in the game. And I think that's when it was called SpookiTalk, was that it was as if it had taken a life in its own and somebody else was writing dialogue, and it was appearing, of its own volition from inside the game. But when also just another quick story about Douglas, when you talk about how much content, I remember there was another point halfway through, and I'd been making lists and lists of movie references and things that the SpookiTalk should recognize. And it was still not enough. This monster was demanding more and more lines. So I went into Douglas's office and I said, Douglas, this is a big task. I think we might have to list and classify everything in the world. And he just sort of stopped for a moment. Then he turned to me and said, I've been meaning to do that for a very long time. And isn't that just a classic? So that was like, I think, Emma, you'd said you'd go into his office and you'd come away with a bigger job than you expected. And I remember almost sadly leaving and thinking, oh no, this is never going to end. But it honestly was astonishing. I've still, in all my life working games, I haven't come across anybody who did a job like you did on that, Jason. So staggering stuff.
Thanks, Neil. I don't think I take all the credit. It was a great team of people there. So yeah, it wasn't just me. And yeah, I'm sure we could have done a better job if we'd had a few more years with Douglas. So
but the lateness of like talking about the Whooshieversary, that extra 6 months you had to train the parser, I mean, it wasn't 6 months, but it's probably about 4 months, made the whole finished piece so much more polished, right? Because I remember you as a team, so there was there was the programmers working on the game, and then there was the programmers working on the parser, and the parser needed as much time as it could possibly take to be given a chance to be trained to pick up the syntax and the language. So I do think that if everything else had made the first deadline, then the dialogue system would have been really impoverished, because it really needed that, and we were completely unaware of that beforehand.
Yes, absolutely. It took a lot of time, and feeding it, for, as you said, Neil, just feeding it for all that time really did help to enrich it. You know, it was only 2 weeks, but every week it was another 2 weeks, and it went on for a very long time. Robbie?
Being muted again. I just in terms of sort of thinking about game design, I do want to sort of do an important about process. You know, it was an enormously complex process, and we were very lucky with an extraordinarily creative group of people. But again, because it is nice to get together. I mean, again, Emma, I made a hire first off of somebody, and it's my fault. Somebody who came from a CD-ROM background. I had done some CD stuff, thinking at my television company that I'd been at, and I didn't know what I didn't know, and he was, it wasn't the right job for him, and we needed to move him on, and Emma stepped into that role, and it was one of the most impressive producerial jobs I've seen anybody do anywhere. And I've been around a long time now. I mean, to take that by the grip, to keep everybody's morale up, to manage this complexity, this huge creative egos. And there was very little shouty, screamy. So I mean ego in a good sense. And the gales of laughter that would come out of Douglas's office when he was walking with Neil and Michael. And as you say, Debbie Barham, who very sadly died very young. But I just want to say the importance of process. I know it sounds dull when we all think for something as ambitious as that, the job that Emma did to take it by the scruff of the neck and make the sinews in the team really fire and really work remains one of the most impressive producing jobs I've been involved with in my career as a sort of chief executive MD type. And I just want to say those things matter, because you know, and of course, Emma had her own creativity. So there was her own creativity, but an enormously effective producing role for that level of complexity. I also want to say that the creativity that Ali brought to things that were really, really new then, our first experience of community and creating a community. And it was so exciting to see it all growing and developing. You know, we put up some incredibly simple stuff and people flooded in, as Yoz was just saying, anytime we created anything. And I think there's a story, and correct me if it is apocryphal, but well, Ali, you tell the story, because the story of the email we got from somebody when we sent out an email saying, go to this, and then immediately sent, and I said, no, that was sent by mistake. And we got an email from somebody. Do you want to tell that story, Alex? It's a good story.
Absolutely. And then I want Yoz to jump in as well to sort of talk about this website that we created to basically keep the fans happy while they were waiting for this delayed game. That was sort of the stated purpose of everything that we built in the online space. But what we did was we, as Yoz kind of said, we kind of created this forum that was sort of buried deep within this intranet of the construction company that was building the Starship Titanic within the fiction. And we kind of sent out, having collected people's name, email, and favorite species of frog early on, we then used that mailing list a little bit later to send out an email that seemed to have been accidentally CC all in the entire company that went out to the fans that said, here is the password to the secret employee forum. Please do not share this password. And then immediately sent out a second email that says, delete that email, that wasn't supposed to go to you. And in fact, we did have somebody reply to us and say, absolutely, I haven't read it, haven't used the password, I will delete it immediately.
Didn't he
Yeah.
claim to be from the CIA? Didn't he claim that he'd worked at an intelligence? Am I making that up? My memory, as he said,
That
I
rings
worked
a
at the
bell.
FBI or I was at the CIA, so I am you can trust me to do this. That's my. I don't think I'm making that up. I think that's the other part of that story.
I think if you're making it up, then we're adding it to the real history.
And
That's
it's the
good.
mythology.
Exactly. So Yoz, do you want to talk about the sort of storytelling online?
Sure. And I can confirm that. So I remember that email now, and it was someone saying, yes, I used to work at the CIA or something, so I know how important these things are. Don't worry, I've deleted it. Well done. So what we did, we had there were kind of 3 phases to the website. There was the first phase we did, which was kind of the brochure for the ship. Okay, so it was saying, come join us on Starlight Lines tours, come see the galaxy. Some amazing writing from Neil and Michael. I love the kind of, you're not the kind of person who takes no for an answer. Sometimes you don't even take yes for an answer. You're just a winner, and you deserve to be first class on this amazing Starliner, blah, 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 right? And it had little screenshots of the game, but otherwise it was mostly about the fiction of the game. And then we did the intranet, and this was an intranet that you only knew about if you had already subscribed to the email list, and then you got this email and jumped in. And within that website, within that intranet, we created, we had some wireframes of the ship, we had some extra content about testing the robots, and things like that. And then we created 2 forums. One of them was the management forum, which you couldn't post to. You could just see the various, management characters having fights with each other, which added backstory. And then an employee forum where we just seeded it with a couple of things, but it was a working forum. It was literally written in a couple of days, like really basic web forum. And we left it there. Never really thought about it until like 6 months later, we came back and there were 10,000 posts in there, right? And it was this amazing contrast, because some of the other forums, unfortunately, descended into kind of bizarre infighting, and it was really weird how these things would go. The thing about online communities is that they so much evolve to the shape that they're in, the starting conditions, and every little chaos. It's chaos theory in action. Just small changes have massive effects. So the thing about the employee forum was that the people who joined in there decided to start role-playing the story of the game and the ship. And they took it so much further, right? It became this astonishing, interactive, collaborative writing project that went on for over a decade, right? It went on way past when the game stopped being sold. But it was like, when we first discovered it, Alison, I don't know if you remember, I remember very little other than, holy crap, there's 10,000 posts in here. But also it was like, oh my God, there's this, the way I described it later is, it's like leaving the vegetable drawer of your fridge for a year and then coming back and finding a bunch of sentient tomatoes who are busily working on their 3rd opera. And it's like, part of you wants to get involved, and then another part just says, no, leave them alone. They're doing amazingly. Don't touch it. It's its own little ecosystem. And so they were doing this astonishing creative writing. And I got some emails, actually a couple of interviews. There's some articles about this. If you Google Starlight Lines employee forum, you'll see a couple of the interviews. I ended up dining out on it for years, despite having done very little to create it. I did end up moving it to my own server once the initial servers came down. And unfortunately, it's dead now because I just dropped it by accident. Sorry, little ecosystem. But it was people who took part in it just said, I fell into this community and it was a story that I could take part in, and I was welcomed, and everybody was building up, right? Everybody was lifting each other and helping each other and just making a story together. And sometimes it is being in a fiction that gives you the opportunity to have the kinds of interactions that you most want, rather than constraints of, real life. So yeah, I've still got the archive of all the posts in it somewhere, but
that is so brilliant. Yes, and thank you, and Sean Sully and everybody else who actually kept the StarshipTitanic.com actual website up. It is incredible that a website from 1997 is still live. I think actually both the sort of basics of the intranet and then the launch website itself. Robbie's going to have to leave fairly soon, so I wanted to go to one of the questions in the Q&A from one of our students saying, "Hi Robbie, I'm actually doing an essay on the ethics of AI, and I was surprised to hear your interest in the field. I was wondering how your interest in artificial intelligence influenced the production of this game that is based in a technological futuristic setting, if it did at all."
Well, I would like, well, the game itself, I have to admit, I barely even knew about AI then, to be quite honest. I mean, I know it had been around for a long time because, you know, people like Claude Shannon, I think, have been working it. I'll just sort of, I do have to go, but let's just, one of the thought experiments I do when I talk about AI, I ask people to imagine a moment of great joy, probably social joy, a dinner, a dance, a movie, a picnic, something of great joy. And then I use Marvin the Paranoid Android as a thought experiment. And again, now have a moment where you felt that your life was out of control. You were feeling grief, the pain of unrequited love, deep sorrow, a time where you felt out of control, road rage. And then ask, funny as it is, would we ever want paranoid AI? And so my Douglas Adams used to tell this brilliant parable of a puddle. And he says there's this puddle wakes up one morning and it looks around at the hole that it's in and it thinks to itself, this hole fits me very neatly. In fact, it fits me so neatly, it must have been made especially for me. And I've always taken that to be Douglas's plea for a bit more humility on behalf of sapiens, in believing that we are the apogee of cognition, perception, and intelligence, as opposed to a very special expression of it. So a lot of my work is on the nature of human embodiment and thinking about how AI is manifest in the world in relation. And I'll finish by something this Emma might particularly appreciate. I was recently literally chased out of a group which was looking at technological unemployment, because I described the singularity, the idea of, well, I'm sure you all know what the singularity is, the idea of this super intelligent moment where AI takes over, as a deeply colonialized white male fantasy. And the host was so angry with me that he literally, I got an email 2 weeks later saying a group of us had got together and either you kind of believe this or we'd rather you left. So I decided to leave. So I think that my interest in thinking about, also Douglas talked about something about the data side of the ship and the matter side of the ship. And as we start to contemplate the metaverse, the notion of the data side of the ship, which was actually a part of the game we never got to build. He wanted to build a whole part of the game, which would be the way the ship saw itself, a whole other kind of visual. We never got to build that bit. So there's lots there. If anybody, I'm Ali, I'm very happy, as you know, to follow up with people. I do so much work on AI ethics. I'm very happy. But those thoughts, Douglas and paranoid AI, dataverse, the data side of the ship, matter side of the ship, and the whole import of Douglas's worldview around perspective is trying to shift the centrality of sapiens from the great big scheme of things. And that's a lot of the work I do now, which is discovering the enormous creativity and the humility about sapiens' place in the great big scheme of things that puddle parable suggests. So with that, I'm going to love you and leave you. Thank you so much for asking me today. I'm sure your students have probably had enough of me, but I could have gone on for hours. And I want to thank everybody who's here. And Ali, thank you. And the team. And we must get together again. We must get together and do this soon. Thank you very much, Dean. And I love you all. Take care. Bye for now.
Thank you so much, Robbie. I will catch up with you later.
Take care. Bye for now.
So I'm just going to ask the rest of the folks on the panel, if you need to run, if you want to stick around for just a few more questions before we wrap up. We got a thumbs up from Yoz. Good, good. Awesome. Okay, so we have a question from another one of the students asking, how did you all end up in your roles on the productions? We had a little bit of that at the beginning from some folks, but she says, brackets, connections, nepotism, that's me, proactive job seeking, etc. And maybe sort of tips on getting into this kind of work in general, if you can't remember that far back.
Well, for me, it was the Douglas Adams way, which is I didn't look for the job looked for me. So that was totally connections. So I was working with Tim Browse, and he moved on to the job with Douglas, and then came back and said, "We need more people. Do you want a job?" So as soon as he said the name Douglas, well, there was a no-brainer. It was absolutely. I said yes, and then thought about the consequences later.
Anybody else didn't touch on it before? I'm trying to remember now.
I answered it incorrectly in that I thought the question was, what did you do afterwards? Not how did I get there before? For me, it was just a regular job search. I had my own company doing like art council commissions and stuff, and thought it might be a good way of paying rent in London if I actually kept an eye open at a job agency, and it came up there. Yeah, so that was how I found the job.
And I think I mentioned. Oh, sorry, go.
So go on, Yoz. Yeah, I may have already touched on mine. You go ahead, go on.
Well, I already touched on mine as well in saying, and I think the thing that has worked for me generally, firstly, obviously, having copious amounts of privilege is something that needs to be acknowledged for this sort of thing, especially in America, where accent does wonders. But you know, as well as like having the connections, I think I'm always so grateful that in looking back that I just saw a company that I was interested in and decided to investigate and got incredibly lucky. But along with that, what has helped is as well as like putting out requests, is going and socializing with the people in the industry. When I landed in America in the mid 2000s, having just been laid off from the company that had also given me a work permit here, I basically just went around to loads of social events, and fortunately already had a bunch of connections that I could use. But by getting to know people and ending up and seeing the same people over and over again, it was really helpful for getting a foothold. And I don't know how often that is recommended. Again, it's the kind of thing that already dependent on networking and connections and privilege. But I just wanted to throw that as a thing that over the years has been repeatedly useful for me.
So, yeah, I'm just going to add one thing to that. So really what I'm going to do is add something that I saw Emma say, or I heard Emma say in an interview, that I did a little bit of catching up on some links that Alison sent. So you said something, Emma, that I so agreed with, about how when you're working in this kind of world, in the creative world, that you should never lose sight of all the other media. I don't know if you remember saying this in an interview about 5 or 6 years ago. And it's something I've always said to students, is if you're a writer, you should know what's happening in dance, you should know what's happening in music, in opera, in rap, in theatre, in the visual arts, across every kind of creative expression, because you've got to get the zeitgeist. You've got to be aware of the zeitgeist formally, consciously, before most people around you are, because anything you create, it's going to take a year or two to actually be out there as an artifact. So you have to strive to be ahead of everybody else in kind of getting, you know, what's that tune that's going, that everybody in 20 years time is going to look back and say, oh yeah, I remember the 20s. It was all about X. And if you're really clever and you keep a broad interest, you'll smell that in the breeze before the people around you, and people will just look to you and you know, for that sense too. It makes you a broader person as a creative. Emma, you should probably I just paraphrased. You say it better than.
You did it perfectly, though. I think I'm going to have to pay you lots of money, or try and find lots of money to pay you, because academics don't get paid that well. But that was a perfect paraphrase. Thank you. I think that I noticed that through studying a lot of what you might think of as auteur game designers. I think people like Will Wright is really interested in gardening, and so there's always a sort of wider interest pool. And for me, you can sort of see that in games like Starship Titanic, and also in indie games, because the truth of the matter is like a lot of really large media companies, the major Hollywood films and the major game studios can't afford to innovate when it's costing you 400 million and 300 people. You're not going to try something new. You're going to try the thing that sold really well a couple of years ago. So I personally feel that the AAA space is less creative or innovative than it can be because of that financial risk. Now, there was financial risk around Starship Titanic and all of the other sort of author-led games that were being developed at the time. But there's also, in the current indie space, a lot of opportunity for experimentation. So for those of you who are interested in making games, go to game jams, find collaborators that can give you experience of what it means to write with a team of people. There's so many different communities in different parts of the world that you can get involved with your sort of skills and interests and get some experience to see what it's like. So I agree with what I may have said once, which is actually quite unusual for me. I don't always agree with my past me. Like, past me did a lot of really stupid things, right, that future me is going to really regret. But I think that version of past me made some sense. I think it's important to behold people and to look outside of what we're doing on a screen in front of us.
This is all brilliant advice. Thank you. And so I'm gonna wrap a couple of the questions from the chat together to ask about your creative process now. Whether it's, what's the process of coming up with a puzzle, how do you link it to keep it thematically in line with the narrative, or what's your sort of personal creative process more generally and how ideas come to life, and think about it also as like, how do we create the future, right? This is sort of been looking back 25 years, but how does what we are creating now create the next 25 years? And the rules are you're never supposed to ask a multi-part question, and I just did it. So anyone who wants to jump in.
I don't think you're getting a lot of takers with people who want to speculate about the future right now, Ali. 2 years out of a pandemic, when time, what's that?
That is fair. That is totally fair. So how about your present creative process?
For me, my creativity feels expressed through my students' work, because as you know, academic life, I teach lots and I have research practice. My research practice involves thinking about who normally gets excluded from game making and game playing, and trying to adjust and shift that, mostly through game jams, because they're these short, really sort of focused creative moments where people come together to make things. So I'm really interested in creating short duration experiences where people can bring their experience and their creativity and their ideas together. So I don't feel as if I have a personal creative practice. I mean, I write papers, but I don't know if I'd call that creative. Not like the type of writing that Neil does, which, I have to write really sort of formal standard academic texts, really. So actually, I do enjoy my bizarre type of writing, but it's not the type of stuff that Neil would be doing. So I'm going to punt the question back at Neil, because he punted one at me. So here you go, Neil, what's your creative process?
Yeah, thanks. Okay, well, so I don't know how many people are writers or sole creators in the group that are listening to this, but I think probably I do have one really, really big piece of advice. Now, I spent about 10 or 15 years not writing because I was scared of writing, and everything I wrote down, I'd look at it and I'd get 2 pages in and it was just rubbish and I'd throw it away. So I became a story editor and a script editor and a development executive, helping other writers. I was so fortunate, some great writers, kind of Oscar-winning writers in the end. And I kind of learned such a lot from them. The thing I learned most was just write. And everything you sit down and write is only the first draft. And if it's good, you're going to have to rewrite it anyway. I mean, for instance, I'm writing a movie at the moment. We're on draft 13 of the movie. 3 years and there are still fundamental rewrites going on. So even if it's good, and I think it is quite good what we've done, you will rewrite it anyway. And if it's bad, you will rewrite it anyway. So that first draft is not going to be around in 2 or 3 months' time. And the big lesson is that writing is about writing and getting it down on the page and not looking backwards. Only look forwards when you write. So that would be my lesson to every single person that's embarking upon a creative process.
That's brilliant. Jason, yours?
I would. Jason, you go first.
Oh, well, all I was going to say is I can't really advise you very well because I'm not a creative writer. So I write computer code, and it's a very creative process, but very different process as well. So I don't think I've got much that I can really say other than work hard, keep going, don't stop because you think you're not there. Just keep on writing and you'll get there. So it doesn't matter how big the challenge seems to be. You can do it, and you just have to persist and keep working at it, and you'll get there. And computer programming is very much like writing, I suppose, Neil. That you write it, and then people tell you it's not what they wanted, so you write it again and again and again.
And in fact, the students in this class are all working on projects in Twine. So they are doing a little bit of coding and a little bit of writing, entwined. So it's very, very good advice. Thank you.
Oh, can I just ask? Sorry, Yoz, my final thing. Can I just say, don't hang around and wait till the afternoon until it gets dark. I mean, I write. I'm there every morning, 9 o'clock for the last 20 years. I'm at my desk. It's a job, and it probably goes on till 7 in the evening. And I've learned that volume is just about the only way you survive as a creative. You've just got to, it's a machine. You've just got to feed the thing. And 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, this is the thing. This is like one of my greatest regrets into that especially feeds into a lot of stuff, realizing what your own limits are and what you're good at and what you're bad at, but also bear in mind that you're not the best judge of your own work. So you can put a lot of stuff out there and like stuff that you discard and think, oh, that's not good enough. Other people may look at it and go, no, hang on, there's something really good there. And ultimately, one of the best pieces of advice that I really, really wish I had internalized when I was younger is that the way to create good things is to create a lot of things, right? And some of them will be good, and also you will get better at creating things, right? There's nothing beats practice. Nothing beats just trying different things. And especially these days, when looking at the future, if you want the future, in some ways, the future is so much brighter than it was when gamification was a thing. And in other ways, it's so much worse, right? Like Emma is exactly. It's like, if you want to see the future of gamification, imagine a boot repeatedly stamping on a human face with coins popping up every time. The constant new tools coming out. Like over the past, I'm in my late 40s, right? And a couple of realizations I've had. Firstly, that I can't leave work till too late because my eyes get tired. By 6 p.m., I can't look at a screen anymore. I can't focus, which is really annoying as a determined procrastinator who leaves everything to the last possible minute. But also the new tools are like everybody goes on about TikTok because it's genuinely amazing, the production skills that complete amateurs are picking up and making totally natural. I started playing with video editing over the past year. It's incredible, the video editing tools you can get for the iPad now that are basically free compared to, and so individuals now have the power to tell stories and create things that took giant teams 10 years ago. Right? And grab everything that looks interesting. Try it if there's anything that appeals to you, because if somebody else can learn it, then you probably can. And so playing and plugging things together, like I think Jason was talking about, or somebody else talking about AI storytelling, and like someone just said, I'm going to teach GPT-3 about dungeons, and turned that into AI Dungeon if you've not seen it, which is amazing. And usually it's like, it's not a matter of just plugging things together and magic happens. Usually you need to put in multiple, many hours of connecting the inputs to the outputs, but sometimes magic happens. And also there's some commonality, some of the commonality you've seen with things like software, because I've been working in like enterprise software for the past 10 years or so, and government software, and trust me, I have so much nihilism to tell you about how awful software is in general and how doomed we all are. But I think something that's common between those things is the concept of put the earliest version out that you can to get some feedback on. The earlier you can do it and the faster you can iterate, the better. And just get used to creating things rapidly. And also, when you're creating a big project, have various ways you can chop things off if you need to shorten the deadline. And be ready to put, there's a saying in the industry with Agile and with lean software, which I think just as much applies, which is when you put the first version of something out, if you're not embarrassed by it, then you're putting it out too late. And, don't keep polishing it. Just throw it out there. It's crappy. It's fine, right? Get the feedback. It's worth it.
Absolute words of wisdom. I love that that Emma's also answering questions in the chat as well. So we're coming up on 20 minutes past the hour, and I'm wanting to make sure that I respect the time of our fabulous participants and also of our audience. So I wanted to see, are there any sort of final words that you want to share as we're wrapping up here? Emma.
Do we have a chance to address Shannon's question? I think it was just really interesting talking about community change, because I think we've touched on how important community has always been to Starship Titanic over the years. And I think things are very different now. All of a sudden community spaces are sort of political sites or sites of they really have significance and impact outside of their sort of virtual walls. So I'd be really interested to hear what Yoz, Neil and Jason have to say about that changing community. Sorry, that's not what you asked me. It's not a final comment.
No, it's actually a really, really important thing to talk about right now, especially with the blurring of fiction and reality in spaces of disinformation and the uses of social media communities to affect the real world for good or ill. Please.
Yoz?
No, I'm gonna ramble too long. Somebody else should go first. Otherwise, they won't get word in edgeways.
Neil or Jason?
Well, I'm not sure I'm going to have much I can add to that. I mean, I'm sort of so much like back office, just creating the content stuff, and I connect with the community in my own IP as much as I can, and I'm desperate to hear and talk to the people who enjoy the content that I create. But in the games business, and that's in fiction. That's where I write books. In the games industry, it's probably filtered. It comes through to me from the producers and from the community managers who are saying to me, how to introduce things, or this goes down well, or people love this, or can we explore and expand sort of stuff. So I'm kind of only I'm reactive to the community who love the games that I'm privileged to work on, but it's kind of filtered through community managers. So I'm not sure I have a great deal of experience in this industry on that.
I think that's actually really good to sort of think about all the different types of communities that build themselves around creation and creative work. Do you want to do a short ramble on that, Yoz?
Sure. Jason, did you want to say something before I?
No, just the important thing is to have fun.
Yeah.
That's all you need to know.
That is astonishingly important. And it's amazing how many communities lose sight of that. They get so dedicated, and people get so dedicated trying to achieve something that they manage to eradicate all the fun that made the thing worthwhile in the first place. And that's tragic. You've got to, that's so much, so sorry, I'll try and organize this and keep it short, because one of the things I did later in life, I spent 5 years at a company called Linden Lab, which is best known for the Second Life virtual world, which I still think of as one of the most amazing things on the internet. And it's amazing what you see in communities. Firstly, that communities are organic in the best and worst ways, and they form in places where you never expect them to. The employee forum is a perfect example of that. But so many forums, like for years, like for so many years, most forums on the internet were running on something like PHPBB, which was a standard PHP-based bulletin board that you'd see everywhere. And what you would often see in the evolution of these things would be people be like talking about, I don't know, guitar amps, right? And there'd be a forum about guitar amps, and they talk about, have the sections about guitar amps, tips and tricks in general and everything. And eventually you'd start to see that the sections that were dedicated to talking about guitar amps were being moved down in favor of far more general topics that the people who had come to know each other and connected through these forums wanted to talk about that had nothing to do with, like, politics and music generally, whatever, right? Because as soon as you form these bonds, people want to start connecting using them in other ways, not just to talk about that topic. But the thing about creativity, especially what Neil was talking about, being able to share creativity, I was thinking about it, like, people love creating, they love sharing, they love collaborating, they hate blank paper, right? And so if you can give them the most basic shell and framework that has a shape to work within, something to attach, like Lego, you need the first studs to attach to, and then things will take off. And it's what amazing seeing the kinds of online spaces that give people tools. People will create their own tools if you don't give them to them, right? So you've got to be very thoughtful about the kinds of tools you do give them. But you look at, like, the virtual worlds, apart from Second Life, the two main virtual worlds in the past decade that I think have had the most effect are Minecraft and Fortnite, right? Minecraft in particular, and bear in mind, Minecraft was an indie game created by one person based off another game by somebody else, Infiniminer. But so many of the big tools that have come out also enabled sharing and creativity that go way beyond what you could ever imagine. And quite often, what you find, the most successful virtual spaces, in my experience, are the ones that get used for things that their creators had no intention around, no idea around, nothing, but they offer this kind of extensibility. And if you let people in and then respect them, right? Because that is so easy to miss, is actually treat them as humans who are allowed to care about each other and whose creations are valuable and are human, right? Then that is already successful, right? Don't think in terms of success in terms of scale. Think in terms of the experience and the value that you've given people, rather than scale, which everybody goes for and breaks, right? The thing people forget about scale is that above a certain point, things just start getting worse and in every way. And it's, instead of going for, I'm going to have millions of people, go for, I'm going to have 1,000 people who do incredible things. So.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so, so much. I really could keep going with this, but given that we're coming up on an hour and a half, I'm going to give anybody who wants to say an opportunity last words, and then we will wrap up.
Thanks for bringing us together. And everyone in Alison's class, you're really lucky to have her as a teacher. That's all I really wanted to say. Nice to see everybody.
Yeah, I'll echo that. Great to see you all again, and I hope for everybody else who's involved in this, we didn't just do the old pals act too much, and that there's some nuggets that are useful to you in what I'm sure will be fantastic creative careers ahead of you.
Jason, last?
I'd just like to say so long, and thanks for all the fish.
Thank you so much, Alison. Thank you, everybody. It's great to see everyone again. Brilliant. And please share the recording. Yeah.
Yes, this has been fantastic, I think, for the class, but especially for the fact that it's been recorded, that we can actually share it with the wider world, because, of course, next year is going to be the 25th anniversary of the actual launch of the Starship Titanic. So I think this is great that we're getting out ahead of that, and this will be online for folks to see what an incredible team of people, just some wonderful human beings, and just calling back to something that someone said earlier, if you at all can, just work with good people, because that makes your life and your work a richer place. So thank you all. I'm going to end now and let you go. And for the class, we will take a 10-minute break and come back at 4:45. Thank you all. Bye-bye.